Oki, and welcome to Ed Talks. My name is Dr. Ute Kote, and I'm the current Board of Governors teaching chair at the University of Lethbridge. The University of Lethbridge's Blackfoot name is a Niskin, meaning sacred buffalo stone. The university is located in traditional Blackfoot Confederacy territory. We honor the Blackfoot people and their traditional ways of knowing and caring for this land, as well as all Aboriginal peoples who have helped shape and continue to strengthen our university community. It is my great pleasure today to welcome Devan McNeill for the Ed Talk interview series, who is an instructor in the Faculty of Health Science. And first I'd like you to, Devan, to introduce yourself.
Sure, yes, thank you. My name is Devan McNeill. I am the program coordinator and instructor in the Therapeutic Recreation Program in the Faculty of Health Sciences.
Devan, you've been at the University of Lethbridge for a few years, but what has brought you into teaching, and how is it like for you to teach here at the university? Can you share your teaching background with us?
Absolutely, yeah. And when I thought about teaching, I thought about way back and little bits of examples of what got me into teaching. When I think of teaching, I think of many different aspects of someone's learning or demonstrating a skill, as we do in therapeutic recreation. There have been moments in my life where I have experienced a bit of teaching. For example, when I was at Brock University, there was a volunteer experience where I was matched with one-on-one with a child with a disability. So those were times where I was teaching them how to do a skill, how to participate in a leisure activity. And from there, I taught swimming as a coach at Brock. And there were other moments during like summer camps where I was instructed to teach and stuff. So all those little things added up to my interest in teaching more formally at a university or college. So those are the kind of moments that sparked the light, I would say, in teaching.
Yeah, and I think it sounds like you have a very diverse experience in teaching, right? And comparing those activities, which we might come to later, I think often shows what's at the core of teaching. So what do you like about teaching? Just in general.
Yeah, I like that interaction, that relationship that you build, right? They often have this thirst for knowledge, but also want to get their hands kind of dirty, like hands-on experience. So I like that light bulb moment where a student or a community member or one of my clients from my days where I practice were really just kind of highlighting this aha moment, and they really felt like they had a meaningful experience with whatever we were doing together. So that was a really meaningful and beneficial experience for both of us.
Yeah, and I think this personal connection, that's what we also try to foster here at the University of Lethbridge, right? It's this theme I see over and over. So maybe just a little more precisely for background, what are you teaching here at the University of Lethbridge?
Yeah, so I teach mostly in the Therapeutic Recreation Program. It's a profession-based program. So years before that, I was practicing as a recreation therapist. And there was a lot of teaching that happened with me and the clients or patients that I was working with. So that hands-on experience, that experience as a recreation therapist, is exactly what I do in the classroom, right? I try to do a lot of hands-on learning, whether that's on campus or online, and bring in a lot of personal experiences, stories from that experience in the courses that I teach. There's been a few courses where I teach that are health science courses, but mostly in the Therapeutic Recreation Program.
So you talk a lot about hands-on and experiential learning. How do you do that in the classroom? I'm really curious, and ask later about online, but let's start. How do you do that in the classroom? How do you build it in? This doesn't sound like the traditional lecture.
It's not. Some of our students have some experience working in the field. Some come from the college programs, which are very practical based, hands-on. So I try to emulate a bit of that by adding a bit of theory, but keeping some of the hands-on. So we do a few things in our program. Pre-COVID, I should say. We did some field trips to Lethbridge community organizations and associations. So I would take the students out to the Therapeutic Riding Association, so they get to see the horses interact with the clients. I took them to the correctional facility to see what the inmates are doing for leisure and recreation. We also take the students to the simulation labs here at the University of Lethbridge. Wonderful facility that has mostly been used for nursing students, but now we're trying to get involved in that as well. So it's a space that is very clinical, and so the students have a job to come in and try to make it as comfortable space. How do you do leisure in a hospital or clinical setting? So it's a lot of creativity working out those challenges.
And you mentioned pre-COVID, right? But last year we were not in person, right? I mean, almost all the teaching at the University of Lethbridge was online. Now I've heard that you've done a lot online before already. So how do you teach things like that, hands-on, online?
Yeah, I would say that it's not as heavy as hands-on online. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of differences. And one of the things that we've learned, being the first program at the university to flip online and have an online cohort, is that you can't replicate everything perfectly. There can't be everything that you do in the classroom works online, and vice versa, right? Mm-hmm. So there are a few independent activities that the students will have to do, but we push them. We push them out into their community, maybe do assessments, mock assessments with friends, family, loved ones. We get them to do some of those field trips on their own, so contact an agency, maybe shadow them for a day, see what they're doing and what they're not doing, kind of things like that. But yeah, it's a lot of work on their own. And recently we looked at a few options online for interactive games or softwares that could demonstrate some hands-on, but it's not the same. It can't be.
Yeah, and it's obvious, right? But it's neat to hear the flexibility of adapting the teaching to the space and the students, and that sounds like that's what you're doing. Very individual placements. That's really wonderful. So even in terms of the teaching that then happens online, which is a different format, how do you engage the students? I mean, this was I think one of the biggest questions we all had this year. How do we connect when we are sitting in front of a computer? How do you facilitate that?
Yeah, and it starts with constant communication. One thing that we've realized is the more information that we're giving, the better connection that they have with us and with the course material. So when you come to a classroom on campus, there is opportunities to talk to the students before you start the lecture, and certainly after. Sometimes it's a lot of students coming up and chatting with you pretty informally, but that is missing online. So we realized that there has to be an opportunity for you as the instructor to communicate as much as possible. So I like to send out weekly or even twice a week, big kind of communications to the students to let them know about the deadlines and what we're going to cover, what are some of the learning objectives, maybe even do summaries of what they should have learned that week. So constant communication. There's other ways to improve communication through Moodle, the software that we use, like forums. But I think those can get kind of boring for students online. So we're constantly looking at other ways to create that avenue or that way of communicating. And sometimes it's our students who who create that. So students will create a Facebook group, or they'll create a Discord, or they get very creative in terms of social media and stuff that we can't manage, obviously, but the students want to connect and stay connected to each other.
And do you facilitate some interaction during your classes? Do you teach live synchronous, as we call it, or asynchronous? How does that fit together for you?
In our program, we mostly teach asynchronous. And the reason for that is we have a lot of students who are practitioners. They work throughout the day, they work weird shifts, weekends, etc. We also have students from BC to Newfoundland. And so creating a one-time event is very difficult. So across the different time zones, it just wouldn't work to have a lot of live. So a lot of our courses are asynchronous. So students will have pre-recorded sessions, but some of our instructors create some live chats that can happen, not mandatory. And office hours are another way to do live sessions, but it's about that balance of what the students' needs are and what you can offer. Other programs, it might be very successful to do synchronous learning, but for ours, asynchronous is the most popular.
And I really like how you focus it all on the students' needs and their locations, their life, right? I think this flexible approach that adapts to the students is so important. And we had this year in other programs where we have international students who were not even in Canada. So time zone issues are actually becoming quite important. I have to confess that I did some synchronous interactions, and I know that one student stayed up past midnight to attend, which made me feel very guilty, but I was impressed by their commitment.
Yeah.
But this flexible approach that you're describing that is really so student-focused. It also sounds like it's a lot of work to organize and balance and manage. So how do you do that from your end? Doesn't that mean that there's constantly something coming? You can't compartmentalize your time, I suppose. So how does that look like from a teacher's end when it's asynchronous?
I think a lot of instructors learned that during the pandemic. Probably yourself have learned that. It is a ton of work up front. And I say up front because once you start to create those libraries of pre-recording sessions, it does get easier. And so we've noticed as our program continues and moves forward, you do have those libraries of videos that you can use maybe up to 3 years, and then you have to start updating them, obviously, with the current trends. But there's a lot of upfront work that happens. And what I think instructors have a hard time is seeing that ability to flip. I just want the on-campus class to be exactly like the online. And there's a huge disconnect there. There's barriers there, and it can't be just that flip. So you have to adapt it, right? You have to change the evaluation. You have to add participation, and you have to get rid of some of the other things. Your quizzes that were once done in the classroom will have to be all on Moodle now. So I don't know if you've experienced that over the last year, because have you taught online before the COVID pandemic happened?
No, I mean, for me, it was like for many of us, it was the first time. And I agree with you. It's a lot of work up front, and it's a very different type of planning. So that's why your program is so important, because we can all learn from what you've developed over the years. Has this program always been online, or was there a time when you were moving it online?
Well, we started as both, an online and on-campus cohort. One of the things we realized really quickly when we started is that a lot of our students are not going to relocate. They want to be working. They want to continue to enhance their career and enhance their education. And we want to provide that opportunity for them. So those students who want to come on campus can, and those who want to stay online and want to continue to work, not move and relocate to Lethbridge, can do so as well. Yeah.
So how did you learn to teach online? There must have been some learning too. Teaching and learning always comes
Absolutely,
together.
yeah. It's it's a bit easier to take an online course and get used to that way of learning, and some examples that you can gather from how others do it. So I was involved in a few online courses, also asking and being very open with other instructors. So in our faculty, we often will be placed into each other's Moodle courses to get some examples of how they do their layouts and how they structure certain things, or just to watch some of their videos and get some ideas. So our faculty has been really, really great in teamwork and sharing that kind of ideas. So it started by taking a few online courses, then being placed in some online instruction, and then there is a bit of trial and error too. With online cohorts, they're not all the same, similar to on-campus cohorts, right? So you have to really do some upfront work at the beginning to see, okay, what are they expecting out of this? And how do we match that to what I can offer?
So how do you get feedback from your students, especially when they are different each year?
Yeah.
How do you know what they need this year or what is working or not working?
Yeah. Well, the very first class of every class I teach, I will do a kind of an assessment with them. I'll ask them questions about what they expect or what they need after I go through the outline. I find that to be the most effective. So we go over the description of the course, the learning objectives. Okay, now what do you want out of this course? And sometimes I do it very hands-on, so they'll write on little sticky pads and post them on the wall. And then we can all come over to that wall and say, okay, this one is really important, this one not so important. And then I send them the list and ask for more feedback if they want to change anything or add anything now that they've had some time. And then that becomes the guiding principles for the course for the rest of the term. There are times where some students need to readjust them, so they'll send me a note. But oftentimes it's very similar over the cohorts, I find. There's little things that I find very interesting, but most part, or overall, it is very similar from cohort to cohort.
That sounds like a really great interactive activity to bring the students also together and collaborate on the first day of class. I should keep that in mind, because it's much more than just learning what they want, but also just setting a tone in your class clearly, right?
It's not my idea. I had a professor at Waterloo do that with us. So I totally stole it from Sherry Dupuis. So I want to give credit there. But you can use it as well. I think it's really interactive, and it places a lot of the emphasis on them. What do they want out of this experience? Because I can have some assumptions, I can guess. I don't like doing that because sometimes you're off base, right?
And how do you do that online without sticky notes and Word? Do you use a virtual format? I know they exist now.
Yeah. So online, it's a lot of feedback right up front.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I do a forum where they just post to some of my questions. There's lots of different interactive ways of doing that. That probably cuts down on paper use and stuff. Yeah.
Well, and we got a lot more tools this year, right? I think we all learned there are many programs out to do things like that even. Sometimes it's a bit overwhelming, but I think over time we'll learn which ones fit our use and fulfill our purpose, right?
Yeah, as a faculty, but also as a university too, right? Yeah, like we jumped really hard on Zoom, but there was a few softwares that we were using before Zoom that weren't meeting the needs of our program at least. And some of the softwares of recording lectures and stuff that were very challenging. I remember reaching out to the teaching center and saying, I lost a whole lecture and it just was lost. I recorded it for an hour and we could never find it again. So I'm happy that we are moving forward and technology is getting better and some of the resources are going to more diverse opportunities here.
Yeah, and I think especially in online teaching, we depend much more on technology. It makes life easier, but having the right tools and learning the right tools is really critical. What have been the most important improvements on that end for you in the last year?
I think just accessibility. As much as we have to learn about those systems, Moodle, for example, students need to learn how to navigate those systems as well. And I think when Zoom came out, that was a game changer because it was so easy to use. And I'm not here sponsoring Zoom at all, but everyone knows how to use Zoom now. From my parents to my nephews and nieces. It's very easy to use. And I think that that's really important when you're doing online teaching. You don't have to have these really intricate different systems and softwares to get that point across. It can be very simple. And if you feel comfortable, your students feel comfortable, then it's going to benefit that relationship. And I'm sure that you've noticed your students comfortable with Zoom over the last year.
Yes, and I agree. It needs to be, the tools need to be supportive and they need to be easy. Otherwise, it creates more barriers, right? And we've certainly seen that. And sometimes it's better to focus on a few, 2 or 3 key technologies than to overload your course with all that one could do, but then disconnect, right? And I think I've heard enough examples from both sides, right? Sometimes as an instructor, you can get lost in the new technology. I sure made a couple mistakes on Zoom and fiddled around not sharing my screen fast enough, but those are minor and the students relate. But I know that also for the students, sometimes it's been frustrating if communication wasn't clear and the tools weren't clear, and on top of that, the connection was breaking down, then it's too much, right? So a wise choice and always having the pedagogy and the teaching and the learning at center is also something I've learned, and it seems like you knew that before. Like, pick your tools so that they work.
Yeah, I do know that sometimes it is helpful that you veer off from the standard tools that are available at the University of Lethbridge. There's some programs that need their own website or need different controls over their classroom, but for a majority of the programs, I think the ones that we have currently do the job and do it well. And I think it's helpful for students to have consistency as well.
Yes, especially in these times.
Yeah.
So you mentioned before that, especially in your program, there's a lot of teamwork and you help each other. And I assume when you recruit new instructors and teachers into the program, that they not always bring this online experience. How do you help each other to become constantly better at online teaching?
Yeah, there's people come from different programs. They come from different universities where they're using Blackboard or WebCT or other systems out there. But I think just having an open door policy really helps as the program coordinator. I think that my ability to mentor new faculty, be added into their Moodle courses is an example of that, where they're having a hard time with gradebook, for example, or uploading a video onto their page. Then I can just jump in and say, okay, this is how you do it. We also have the teaching center that is available, but sometimes there is a delay, I guess, and for some instructors it is immediate, right? They need help right away. So there's a combination. There's a few people that they can go to, and I think that that's best. You don't rely just on one person to help with all of the technology issues or all of the issues related to getting onto the website, right? Yeah. I remember one faculty member had a hard time opening up Moodle on her web browser, and I said, just change web browsers. Go to Chrome or Firefox or something, and that did it. It's an easy kind of conversation to have, but you need that open door policy. You need to state that you can come to me at any time, and doesn't matter how silly the question is or simple you may think it is. It can really stress people out. And we find that with students too. If they can't get on to something, or they can't submit something and it's 11:55 at night and they're emailing you, and of course you're not responding, right? So there needs to have that kind of open door policy.
Yeah, and this sounds like a great teamwork to overcome all these, especially these technical difficulties. They can be really hard roadblocks, no matter how small they are. They create these big barriers. But I mean, I'm also interested to understand, how do you help a new instructor, for example, design the course? All this work that we talked before, that there's actually much more work before you start teaching with online teaching, because you have to have it all prepared, you have to have your materials ready, you have to have a good plan so that it functions asynchronously. How do you facilitate this?
Yeah, it starts with consistency again, where our program really tries to make everything as, not standardized, because I don't like that word, but you know, the students have told us in the past they don't like that this outline was drastically different than the other faculty's outline, or the Moodle page was completely different. It makes them have to relearn 5 different ways in one term. So what we've done is we've created a consistent template for the course outline. We've created consistency in terms of the look of some Moodle courses. We've offered, like, okay, so your first tab should be an introduction to you, some pictures of yourself. A picture of the textbook is really helpful. So we've added those into our curriculum conversations.
So to me, it seems like one of the strengths of the program you're leading as program coordinator is really this coordination and teamwork, right? An integrated approach that seems to be unique on campus. How did this evolve?
Is it?
I don't know. It's not something I've seen too often, but it's a very convincing and powerful approach to me.
Yeah, I take that role very seriously, and I don't want the program to fail. I want the students to be happy. I want them to succeed. We have heard from students that they feel very connected to us. So our relationships are strong. We have small class sizes. That's really important for us. But we also see that they work hard. Our certification rates are very high, higher than the international average. So we find that, that's the payoff, right? If you have that kind of teamwork, students will look at that, they'll replicate that in their practice, and they'll stay connected with us throughout their career, which is really important.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So it really pays off, right?
Yeah.
It makes a difference for the students, which is so often, I think, the guiding principle. We need to check and make sure we do what works for our students.
It's also like having each other's backs too. We've noticed we're small, and when we started, it was just me. I was the only faculty member in the TR program, and now we're up to 5. So we're growing as our program grows, but we're still small. 5 faculty is quite small, and if there is one person who is drastically, an outlier, then it can have a drastic impact on the students' relationships with us in what we found as a negative way. Creatively, and how you teach a course obviously is going to be different, but how you set that up and how you stay connected to what are the goals of the program, what are the goals of students, then I find that as a program coordinator, it leads to higher success.
That's great to hear. So we talked a lot about your program, but I think we can learn from what you do on the broader perspective, especially now that we know that online teaching will be much more prevalent. We also have learned it's not that easy. So we all have to continue learning. So how do you think can we as a university really support high quality online teaching and learning moving forward, learning from your experience and the stumbling we've all tried the last year, let's say.
Yeah, it's too bad that that happened all at once. I mean, there are opportunities where, faculty members in TR have reached out and done talks and shared their information with the teaching center or with each other in health sciences. But yeah, there should be more of that relationship building. And one of the ways is participating in some of the events and activities that happen on campus, like the ISW, the Instructional Skills Workshop that I completed with you. So that is a way of just connecting with other faculty members across campus. If you do have questions, don't feel like you're the first person to realize that, oh my God, I'm the first person to do online teaching, or I'm the first person to do this in the classroom or this online. You're probably not. There's probably a lot of different examples out there. So feel free to reach out to those who have a bit more experience. But we're not the experts. We're still figuring things out. We're still learning from the challenges of COVID and before COVID happened. So lots of ways to reach out, to participate in the events and workshops that happen. The Spark conference is another important one. A thing that I did as soon as COVID happened was reach out to the Project Sandbox. That was really important with Rob as their team lead. And I was like, what camera do I need? What microphone do I need? What are the resources that would make online teaching the best? So I found that to be really helpful here at the university. I don't know if you've ever used the Project Sandbox at all?
So tell us more. Now in broad strokes, I mean, this is, I think, learning how we connect as teachers and learn from each other is important. And having an example is always the best.
There's a lot of resources that the university offers. So it's tapping into those little ones that probably are not at the top of everyone's list. I know the teaching center is like, okay, anything related to teaching, you go there, but there's a lot of resources in the library that are very helpful, or faculty-specific ones. So this sandbox is an opportunity to do workshops, learn how to navigate special technology. They gear to grad students and faculty, and it's just very helpful to have that one-on-one conversation with someone who has a lot of experience with that area of expertise. Because, even with online teaching, I was using the webcam in my laptop, which is okay for certain things, but maybe not for other things, right? You want a camera that you can do some more high quality stuff with.
Yeah, and I think the two themes I hear you talking about that I feel we've really learned this year is, first, as teachers, we must be learners. If we stop learning, we are not good teachers, right?
Yeah.
And last year was a steep learning curve for many of us, but we have learned, right? And I think it will transform teaching forever, but hopefully, I hope we also keep the sense of we need to keep learning, because there's always another way, a better way, or maybe just a newer way, a technology that hasn't been invented when we started teaching, but that's out now, right? So to keep this attitude of learning and having space to learn and support to learn and maybe time to learn really pays off, because teaching is evolving and learning is part of teaching, right? It also makes you more humble. And sit in the shoes of your students again.
There will be mistakes, there will be challenges and barriers ongoing, But your willingness to learn from that, your willingness to explore other things. When students bring an idea to you, or an online method of getting across some learning objectives, take it, Go and visit that webpage and explore it and say, is this appropriate for our class? Will it actually benefit, or is it too much work right now? And maybe I'll shelve it for another time, but There's lots and lots of opportunities out there and resources. And embrace some of the activities that the students will bring to you.
Yeah, and in my experience, the students appreciate and they see if you are trying and learning. Then if you fail, it sometimes only strengthens the relationship as long as you're willing to give up when the moment is come that this is not working, right? And that applies to technology, but also to teaching strategies. I had an epic failure with forums in my course.
Oh, really?
After a while, I realized this is not working the way I'd set it up. I had good intentions, but clearly, they didn't survive the practice test. So the best moment in my class was when I said we stopped doing the forums the way we wanted it. We only used the forums to give each other's compliments, and the students loved it. It was a turning point in my class where we connected, and they were happy about my failure because it gave them space and recognition, right? And I think this attitude of learn, try, fail, and learn and try again is something we as teachers have to almost model for our students. Yeah. Because that's how learning happens, through failure sometimes, right? Yeah. And you can't be afraid of it.
But how do you know it's a failure? Are students telling you that it's not working? Are they emailing you? How does that information?
Yes, and you have to be attentive to your students, right? In my case, I noticed that we had very little activity. So it was very obvious, right? And that my encouragements were going nowhere. I was just annoying them. You should do this, and nothing happened. It was like I didn't feel comfortable at some point only telling them what they should do, and clearly there was something else going on. But yes, it means the part of the learning is learning from your students, right? Yes. Learning from them what is working, and then being willing to look for alternatives with them, or sometimes just bring something in they didn't expect to break that moment of failure. Because failure isn't bad. Failure just means it's a chance to try new and learn, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, if we accomplish all of our goals without any challenges, then we need to really revisit how we structure our goals, right? We're making them way too easy.
The other theme I really heard you talking about in terms of how you support each other in your program, but also how we can learn to new tools and new approaches to online teaching is to connect, right? And I think we've also seen that this year, based on the pandemic, how much that connection matters because we've often lost it. And for example, we didn't have a campus community anymore. We were not bumping into each other in a hallway to ask questions, right? We had to be much more conscious. So one of the questions I think moving forward is how do we build that community amongst the teachers again, and ideally across disciplines, so that it is really inspiring? One of the things that the Faculty of Health Sciences did during the pandemic was some social events through Zoom. I know that, by the end of the week, you don't want to be in front of the camera anymore, but we found that it was really important to connect like that. So one instructor, one faculty member would be in charge of what the activity was, right? And so you bring your beverage and you bring your willingness to participate in whatever the activity was. So it could be charades, it could be something where you get up and dance or move. Could be trivia as well, that was a very popular one. So it was just a way of connecting. At the end of the week, to go onto Zoom for an hour, hour and a half, and not feel like you're at a meeting, and more of just a social activity. I mean, that's what we were doing pre-pandemic. We would go over to a restaurant or a bar and connect that way. So I like that followed us through to a very challenging time during the pandemic. So those little things mean so much, especially for new faculty members who came to us during the pandemic. There was no opportunity to bump into each other in the hallways, so we really had to think creatively about ways to do that. Yeah, that's a wonderful example, and I think we learned to be conscious about it and value it more, right? Before it was just the fun add-on, and I think now we understand it's actually an integral part of becoming the best teachers we want to be by connecting, learning from each other. And you mentioned before the instructional skills workshop, which is for me always a prime example where we interact for 4 days with 6 people in a very intense way, but across disciplines, across very different teaching styles, and we learn with and from each other. And for me, those are the best teaching moments because we can share a lot there, right? We might be alone in the class, but we're actually not alone in the university community. And the teaching center, I think, is really a good driver of facilitating these connections. Even this year, it was a bit challenging. Sometimes we were exhausted and time was running out. But I think we learned what to value. Right?
Yeah, and that's a good example of cross disciplines, right? We can kind of get stuck in our bubbles, in our faculties, or programs even, but having that opportunity to interact with people across disciplines is really important.
So how do you see then the future of teaching? We are going back in person this fall. That's a narrative, but it's not true, right? We're keeping a lot of the online. There's talk about blended and hybrid. What do you think? Where are we going? Our program will always have the online piece for those students, and now we're going to be back on campus. So it is finding that kind of balance with what works, what doesn't work. So moving forward, I think that we need to always talk to the students, see what they need and what they don't need. We've constantly heard, I don't need an 8 a.m. class. So I think that's really important to consider moving forward as a university. Okay, there are a few things that we can change about on-campus learning. If there is an event or something, or a conference, or there's a time where we want a guest speaker to come in, there are ways to do that virtually now that didn't really exist beforehand. So not to say that we have a limited pool in uLethbridge. We have some great practitioners, great educators, great guest speakers. But now our program is really shifting to look at guest speakers that we can do that one-to-one conversation with over Zoom. We can do live, pre-recorded. They can do a presentation and just submit it, whatever works for them. So our program is moving forward with that option so that students can hear from people up in Fairview or high level, places that would be very inaccessible. So that's a good change from this pandemic for teaching in the classroom and online, is that we are really putting our focus into expanding our guest speaking people. Yeah, and it's really bringing the best of the new and the old world of teaching together, right? And I feel, in a way, through these connections we formed online, the world has gotten smaller. We are more connected, right? It is easier to do that. How do you envision connecting this in the classroom? Do you think do we need new classrooms? Do we need more conference rooms so that we can have live conversations with speakers? That's something I know in the past has happened. I've tried it, but it was very, very cumbersome still, let's say. So how will the future classroom look like? Will every classroom be a conference room?
Well, I think other universities have already put that in place. Every classroom is available for conferencing. University of Lethbridge, I hope that we work towards something, not on that scale of every classroom, obviously, but at least having more options, right? At least every building having that capacity, so you don't have to leave, your building to do that. And that students feel more comfortable with that as well. So having those conversations back and forth. There have been some times where the university has done those kind of events. I remember Edward Snowden came and spoke, but he was conferencing in, and we were able to engage in a conversation that way. So those kind of events and those kind of opportunities, I hope, will increase. But we'll have to see what the budget is. I'm not in charge of that, so.
No, but I mean, I agree that it's an opportunity, right? And for example, in the long term, that might be cheaper still than traveling. And it's a way how we can capitalize on what we've learned. So we talked a lot about technology, but what else do you think is the lessons we've learned last year of what we should keep for better future teaching?
I think compassion is the thing that I'll take into every class now. There was an idea that if it's an online class, they can work at their own speed, and we set up all the deadlines at the beginning. So there shouldn't be an issue with getting things in on time, right? Mm-hmm. But what we've learned over the last couple of months is that some challenges are just too heavy, right? Mm-hmm. That either with sick time or with childcare or the stress of being at home 24 hours a day can, impact the student's health. And therefore, they're not able to focus on the deadlines as much. So I've learned to bring compassion into my class more so than I was before.
Yeah, I think we've all learned that life is a huge factor in learning, right? Mm-hmm. And we can't separate it all the time. So do you still have deadlines or floating deadlines? Like, just practically, how do you do that?
Yeah, I do, because I think they're important. But if a student needs extra time, we do have a policy in place. They reach out to us beforehand, not after, mm-hmm. and just be honest with us, right? We don't require a documentation. We don't want a doctor's note. We'll take your word. And I think that strengthens the relationship.
Yeah. In a way, the private life and the work life or studying life is much more interconnected when we were sitting all at home, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't compartmentalize and separate it anymore. And sometimes that was an advantage. Yeah. I know some students have really reported it has helped them. It has helped them with family or not having to commute, saves them time. But it can also be a huge challenge and mm-hmm. A bit of an intrusion in our privacy. So more compassion, more respect is needed, right, to make this possible for everybody.
Yeah, there's going to be times where I can't get my technology to work. Mm-hmm. And so if I know that, then I know that students have the same issue, right?
Yes.
So I've had students upload a video and there's no audio, or that it's upside down for some reason and they don't know how to fix it. So having that room, that space for them to play around for a few extra days or hours is really important.
And communicating it, right? That's what I also find. So the students know you're not granting favors to one or the other, but it's this general approach. We need to be supportive. We're all in this pandemic together, but we're also just in this learning, in this course together. And what matters is the outcome, that every student learns, right? Yeah. And that every student tries their best, but that doesn't always mean meeting the deadline. Trying your best can mean something very different, right?
Yeah. So I really like communication beforehand, right? Mm-hmm. Up front, just tell me what's going on. You don't need to get into the details, obviously. Yeah. That's very personal. But yeah, try to email me before or contact me before and not after.
Yeah, and for me, this is also a way to prepare the students for their professional practice later, right?
Yes.
Because they will always work in teams, as we do.
Yeah.
There will always be deadlines. That's how life is. And you have to do your best to meet them. You have to be reliable and show it, but you also need to know when to communicate, when you can't, or ask for help early, or arrange a coworker. So to have these skills and to see this modeled, I think is something that might not be written in our course outlines when we talk of specific subjects. But that is still a skill that we really need to convey to our students to prepare them, right?
Yeah. Is that what you take from this experience?
Yes. A lot more about communication, interaction, teamwork, engagement as a facilitator, not just for learning, but also for, coping with life. Right? Surviving the stressful times.
Yeah. Being at home with children, right?
Yeah, in my case, being at home with children. So how have you personally done this? How you've balanced this desire that I sense in you to be there for your students, to help them, to be there for your colleagues, anytime, open door, all the time, but still, keep your own sanity.
Oh, I love my leisure time. I love my off time. Yeah. So I don't balance. I challenge that word of balance because I think that suggests that there needs to be equalness in that. And I don't think that that's going to be doable. I don't think it's appropriate at times. There are times where a deadline is there and that you need to spend more time on that. So that suggests that that balance is off somehow, and how do you work that out? And what I've found is that there's shifts in priorities that happen in your life. And during some times you have more kind of leisure time, but other times there's a heavier workload that happens. And for some people, they find leisure in their work too. So that line is not always as clear. It's more of a fence, and sometimes things get through the fence and sometimes they don't. And that's my kind of approach but I really, really want to challenge that notion of balance because it's too traditional in that approach where you have work, you're there 8 hours a day, and then you have leisure. And in modern times, those boundaries are a bit more fluid and flexible now. So if I go for a walk during my lunchtime, or if I am talking to a faculty member and we're, engaged in that social well-being aspect, then that feels more like a leisure, even though it's in that work time. So there's a lot of ways that we can get our needs, our leisure needs, through more of that traditional workspace or time space, if that makes any sense.
I really like hearing that because I think it models what our students are experiencing, right? Mm-hmm. They have hard deadlines, they have times that are stressful where things are accumulating. It's a final exam time, we know about that, but typically there's also weeks where it just happens that they have an assignment doing 3 or 4 of their classes, right? So an 8-hour workday is just not feasible for them. But I think that's something we have to learn to also model, right? To say you push hard, you set priorities, but then maybe you take the break later, or you learn how to manage your time by planning ahead, starting early. I think this year we learned much more about that. We have to help the students structure their time. Early reminders sometimes, or smaller checklists, not just having the big assignment, but saying you hand in the outline first and break it into tasks. Because it's a way, maybe balance is the right word, but to find a feasible way to accomplish a big task. But we were all facing big tasks last year, right? Or what I see with my students, in particular with my graduate students, where it's more individual learning, that I can sometimes say, keep in mind what is the urgent deadline, but also keep in mind what is your big goal, and balance those. Make sure you work on your big goal and not just chase the short deadlines, because that can get very frustrating. In our case, we can chase so many emails and requests that we feel like we're getting nothing done, right? So balance has many dimensions. It doesn't have to be a strict, fixed way of doing it. But I think we learn more that these are things that matter to our students, right? And we are much more than teachers who convey knowledge. I think we really need to convey skills and model also those skills.
Yeah. So they learn a lot from us, and how we engage with other people, with other students, and some of the activities that we do, and how do we create that shifts in our life, right? So being very open and honest with students, especially the online students. They can email you at weird times during the night, on weekends, and that's when they have their time to work. But having some sort of structure in place, let's say you'll get back to the students within 48 hours or something, and letting them know if there's an event I'm going to, so I'm going to be slow that week. For reading break, for example, I'm going to take this amount of time, or I'm doing something. You don't have to get into the details. They don't need to know your whole life, but just in terms of having those kind of boundaries and saying, you know what, I can't get back to you within 12 hours. So give me some extra space. and I'll get back to you within this time frame. That's a major issue with online teaching, is that students are doing all sorts of different things, right? When on campus, you have most students interact with you before and after and during office hours. Online students, they could have a 4-hour block on Saturday that they do all of their work for your course. So that's when they're going to need to hear from you, or that's when you're going to receive 5 emails from them, which is not too bad. I mean, I just got used to checking my emails multiple days. I don't respond right away because I do like that kind of shift in my life and my work life. But there are times where you have to be just upfront about what the communication plan is going to be.
Yeah, and for me, this is communication including clarity and expectations. I find that the students know what they can expect, they're fine. But if you don't communicate it, that causes tensions and uncertainty. And we've lived with so much uncertainty in the last year that wherever we can give the students certainty, whenever we can tell them what to expect, it really helps. I have that boundary, for example, before assessments, that I say, any email which enters my inbox before 8 p.m. I can answer. But whatever comes afterwards, I just can't, because that still means I will work till 10 or 11 to answer the emails, right? But if they keep coming, I wouldn't get any sleep that night. So I make it clear. And sometimes I think it's an incentive for them to not procrastinate the studying, but to get the question out and not to ask whether they should ask the question or not, but to say, well, either I ask it now or I won't ask you, so I better ask, right? And then this opens more communication in a way. Or also just saying, yes, you will get an answer, but it takes 24 hours. Then they know and they're not getting nervous, but they also know they can rely on you. And I think this reliability is important, especially when we don't have the personal connections. And it takes a little more effort to build that trust relationship, I find. But it can be done.
Yeah, and that's a good strategy of saying, giving those deadlines. For assignments, if the student has a question about an assignment, I will answer it up to 3 days before it's due. And so that switches them to think about, I have to do it before then, because that's when Devan's going to respond. So anytime after that is a bit of a grace period, I hope. But I've learned that if you don't have those boundaries, you do get emails right up until the deadline, and it's questions that could have been easily found in the lectures or in the rubrics, etc. So you need those kind of boundaries.
Yes. So clearly a lot of learning has happened in the last year for the students, but also for us. And I like what you said, that we need to keep the flexibility and the compassion. It will make a difference and will make our teaching and learning more holistic and more centered on the student needs. So thank you. Thank you for your time.
Yes.
Thank you for the conversation.
Yes, thank you. It was great. Great to talk about teaching.
Always. Anytime, Devin.